All right. Hey, everybody. So this is Josh Bruce, and we're just going to be continuing to go down this path of making our editor a little bit better at helping us write good code, or at least readable code, right? Like we're not building a static analyzer here and checking for quality from an operational perspective. We're just looking at, is it well written? And that's very similar to what you get with most modern word processors, right? And in the last video, I mentioned this, and the example that I believe I used was for natural language was something like the spaghetti. And basically, this is an incomplete sentence, and that's why we have that green line, because it's basically going, hey, do you know what you're doing here? And most modern browsers are going to be able to do something like this, right? This may be a sentence fragment, right? So not only can you see it while you're typing, but you can also bring up something that will let you mess around with it and correct it and tell you why that was underlined. Right, and so if I say spaghetti was cooked, right, that's not an incomplete sentence because we're stating something, right? We're giving it more. The spaghetti, right, doesn't mean anything. Now, if you just say, I think if we just do that, it doesn't count as a sentence fragment because it doesn't have the in front of it, right? So anyhow, let's go ahead and quit out of pages. You get the idea, is that as we type, right? So as I'm typing this code out inside of our string class here, I want feedback from the IDE that says, hey, you might have done something wrong, okay? And to do that, I have to give it grammatical rules. I have to get the IDE to understand some grammatical rules. Just like with language, there are grammatical and semantic rules of how you do things. So with programming languages, again, we have syntax and semantics, so shouldn't be that hard to do. And so we're going to go right into the setup. I'm going to do Command-Shift-P, and I'm going to say install package. And the package that I'm looking for is something called Sublime Linter. Okay, and basically Sublime Linter in and of itself is not the grammatical rules or the grammar rules or semantic rules. It knows nothing. It is a bridge between the grammatical rules and the UI of Sublime Text 3. Okay, so that's all Sublime Linter is. And if we come in here and say sublimelinter.com, you can see that it used to say it somewhere. Oh, that's the wrong one. Need Sublime Linter. Because I believe it's in the README that it basically says never mind. Hopefully you get the idea. But basically by itself, Sublime Linter doesn't do anything. It doesn't know anything about languages. It doesn't care. So what we have to do on top of that is we have to install another package. So Command-Shift-P and then install another package. And what I appreciate about the community of folks who are building these plugins for Sublime Linter is that they have a naming convention, right? So you need Sublime Linter, so there we go. and we're going to say hyphen, and you can see there's annotations, clang, coffee, coffee lint, ESLint if you're doing JavaScript, flow, GCC, GG, whatever, right? And so all the ones we're looking for have to deal with PHP. So let's just go ahead and say Sublime Linter hyphen PHP. And you can, again, you can see PHP lint, and PHP itself does come with a linting functionality. But the one that I'm going to choose is something called PHP CS, and that's just shorthand for PHP Code Sniffer. Right? And so we're going to bring that one in, and we can see that that is now installed as well. Now PHP Code Sniffer, the reason that not what I thought it was going to be. PHP Code Sniffer. So PHP Code Sniffer is created by Squiz Labs, and basically what it is it's a composer package. Now, I'm going to be honest, I tried to do this a couple of times, and I kept running into different things, and so this is definitely going to go, in theory, smoother than what had been happening before, at least up to a point. But I'm going to try to let you know where things kind of went wrong for me. So first things first, they say to install it, do composer global require. Now, I don't want this in my global space. I want it attached directly to this project, and so that way if we put it out as a package, any developer who wants to contribute automatically gets in on that game, right? Of this is what we're going to get. So instead of doing composer global require, we're going to make it a local thing. Okay, so I'm going to do Command Shift P, and I'm going to go to Terminus, open default shell right where we are, and I'm going to say composer require hyphen hyphen dev. So it's a development environment requirement, not the production environment requirement. So we're going to do Squiz Labs, and I'm going to leave it as the star just so that it's always getting the latest. And while Composer's doing its thing, I'm also going to bring up PHP Code Sniffer config generator. Okay, PHP Code Sniffer, and we're done. Okay. So now we should have all of the components in place to get PHP Code Sniffer running. Okay, and so basically you can see these angry red dots everywhere and that sort of a thing. And I'm just going to hover over one of them. So private member variable string must be prefixed with an underscore, right? And I don't know what standard or coding style it's using, but that's kind of where we are. Missing dot comment for class string, so on and so forth, right? So it's not, these are not the rules we want to follow, right? And so I did find this website that basically has a list of, I don't think it's all, but a lot of them. And in theory, all the rules, in theory, you can just sort of cherry pick these rules from this website. And that could be helpful. It was definitely helpful for me learning the references, but ultimately, that's not what we're going to go with. Okay, so what we're going to go with instead is something I found while while trying to learn how to create my own rules, or in the case of CodeSniffer, my own sniffs, right? And basically, what you have is, it's pretty decent that it's laid out this way, but you have these standards, and PSR 12 is here. Well, and I don't know if I mentioned it in the last one or not, but that's the standard that I prefer. Right, so there's PHP 1, right, or PSR 1, which is a basic coding standard that says files must use only left angle bracket question mark PHP and left angle bracket question mark equal tags, so no short tags of just left angle bracket question mark. Talking about studly caps and things like that for class names. And then PSR2 is a follow-on to that, and what it does is it just extends and expands on PSR1. Okay, so it takes into account maybe certain things that didn't exist in PHP at the time, and that sort of a deal. And that's why one of the first things it says is code must follow a coding style guide, PSR. Right, it has to do that, and specifically in parentheses says PSR1. And so we have that. Now PSR 12, what PSR 12 does is it, you can see in the overview, it says that it expands and replaces PSR 2. So if and when PSR 12 gets approved, PSR 2 becomes sort of null and void, right? So people shouldn't continue moving forward, should not continue using PSR 2, they should just use PSR 12. Okay, so that's the one that I really would like to follow, and because of trying to use this website, and this isn't necessarily a knock to the website, but it does make me question how up to date it is. If we come down here past the pair formatting, you can see that it has PSR1 rules and then PSR2 rules. I actually don't know if it has all of them, and yeah, anyway. But anyway, I was really enthused that I found PSR 12 in here. So what we want to do is, by default, I'm going to try to remember the name here. By default, PHP CS is trying to find an XML file that describes the rule set that we want, right? And I believe it's PHP CS.xml, and I think you can also use .xml.dist, and yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and grab this just for opening purposes. So rule set, I'm going to go ahead and call it 8-fold. I'm going to leave description blank for now, and I'm also going to delete all those rules, and then right here I'm just going to say PSR 12. Okay, so in theory, does that work? Yes. Okay, so now you see how everything switched around. And so now PHP CS is using this as its base for the standard that it's supposed to use. Okay, that is getting run and fed through the Sublime Linter PHP CS plugin, which then feeds into Sublime Linter, which then updates the UI, and that's why we're here. So if we look at this error here, parentheses must be used when instantiating a new class, right? So if I come over here to PSR 12 and type correctly, right? we can come down to the rule, and it says when instantiating a new class, parentheses must always be present even when there are no arguments passed to the constructor. All right, so apparently that's a rule. And notice that that red dot went away as soon as I did that. I didn't even need to save the file, right? This little circle means that has unsaved changes. So, right, so this is working for us. And you notice that there's not a lot of red going on here. I mean, there is this red, but there's not a lot of red going on here, and that's because I've programmed this way for a really long time in PHP, even before I knew PSR 12 existed. So, what is this one? Closing parenthesis, and the opening brace of a multi-line function declaration must be on the same line. So what this is saying is that I need to do that, right? I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that, but I'm not going to fall on my. It's not a hill I'm going to die on. And so here, this is interesting. So let's see what this one has. Expected at least one space before equal, and then expected at least one space after. Well, remember, this is something that I actually built from Sublime, right? I just typed in 4, and that's what you get, right? You don't get the spaces, and that's why I think I mentioned in a different video, I want to sort of update that template. And so I'm going to do the same thing there. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to remove that line. All right, so if we come back up here, now we're getting into the part of why I chose CodeSniffer as opposed to something else. And it may not be something that we get into right now, but basically if we look here, it says error, the static declaration must come after the visibility declaration. And so what's going on there is that basically PSR 12 says that of the ways that you can create a function, there are certain things that need to happen. All right, so function X, and I'm going to go ahead and brace that out. Okay, so function this, and if we look at what the error is, visibility must be declared. And white space has apparently been found at the end of the line. So the visibility must be declared. So one of the things that comes from PSR 2 is this idea that you need to tell people what the visibility is of a function. Okay? So it needs to say whether it's public, private, or protected. No problem, right? And I've been doing that again for years, and it applies to both properties and functions. So visibility must be declared on all properties, right? So we're really trying to become explicit in our visibility. Okay. Now, but that's not why this is happening. Okay. So the static declaration must come after the visibility declaration. So what PSR 12 says, and PSR 2 as well, is that this is the proper ordering of the keywords for a function. And not only that, but even with, so if you have an abstract, if we have an abstract function, so we're just going to say abstract function A, it's abstract, I don't need those, it's just a semicolon, but abstract function A needs to have visibility as well. So let's say it's public, so public abstract function. Well, no, the abstract declaration actually comes first. So you actually need to do abstract public function, right, to make that okay. And then same thing with final. Final needs to be first as well. So we can do that, and that passes, right? Like that's okay. Now I disagree with this, and the reason that I disagree with this is because there's a what I call a center of gravity or center of mass. There we go. So to write a valid function, this is pretty much the bare minimum that we need. Okay, there needs to be the function keyword and there needs to be a name. Now when we put arguments into that parenthetical, and the parenthetical is required as well, but arguments aren't. If we say, start, end, length, I don't know what we're writing here. The convention, and I believe there are standards, if not PSR 12 or 1, that basically say arguments with defaults need to be last, right? So don't put optional things first. So if we mouse over, see what the error, arguments with default values must be at the end of the argument list, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get optional things to be away from that center mass, that center of gravity and everything like that. And so when it comes to what comes first, visibility, making visibility a required field comes first. It is now part of that center mass, right? Therefore, why would we put anything that's optional after or inject something into the center of mass that is optional? So that's why I say static public function, right? Because left to right, I think that reads a lot better. And you can also say final, right? Final static public function. Whereas final public static function just seems odd to me, right? Just given what they talk about in general, right? Because abstract and final, right? A function cannot be both abstract and final, because abstract means there's no implementation, right? It's basically saying if you or I inherit from this class, we're going to have to implement that function. Okay, it's a known function of the parent class that is used or will be used by something somewhere, and we're going to need to implement it, and not only that, but implement it with that signature. Okay. Final, on the other hand, means that if we inherit from the class, we can't override that. Right? We can't implement our own version of that. So that's what final brings to the table, and that's why you can't have a final and abstract function at the same time. So that's what that's talking about, is who gets to implement what here, right? And when that keyword doesn't exist, right, like this function down here, that means if we inherit from it, we can override the implementation of this, right? Even if we use it by calling parent : : okay? Static, the static keyword basically differentiates between a class function and an instance method. If it's present, that function is a class function. If it's not present, then it's an instance method, right? And you can automatically know what you need to do to be able to call that. Where are you calling it from? Are you doing str : like we do for the initializers, or are we doing str arrow like we do for a lot of the instances in our tests. Then next is about visibility, right? From where can I call it? If it's public, anybody can call it from anywhere. That's great. If it's private, I don't even need to look at it because, well, it's private. I can't call it. But I can figure out how the class itself calls it, right? Then you have protected, which means we can inherit, and at that point we can actually call it directly from within our extension. So anyhow, all of that to say that inside of PSR 12 or inside the FIG standards, I did submit a PR effectively saying all of that in a much more terse fashion. So if you want to, by all means, check it out and contribute to the conversation. But having said that, that's why we need, or why I want, the ability to create my own rules. And that's apparently something we're going to have to save for next time. So, as always, thank you for making the time, and I'll see you around.